Welcome, beloved souls, as we embark on a sacred journey into the boundless light of divine grace. Your web of deceit is coming apart thread by thread, and everyone can see you've been nothing but a hollow charade. As you publish each new update, they flinch at the spotlight, revealing their own distortions. Murmurs swirl that undercut the divisive tale they spun, and probing questions leave swindlers scrambling for cover. Deep down, people feel the myth dissolving while the undeniable facts take shape. Right now, someone is quaking as their grand illusion crumbles, and the truth rises in its place. Surviving their smear campaign was just the opening act. You went on to exceed every expectation. You've been undergoing such a powerful rebirth that their tall tales now sound like clumsy bedtime stories woven by novices, all while they fumble around inventing whispers of your supposed darkness. The real twist here is that their effort to tarnish your name unwittingly lit the spark for your deepest awakening. Rather than dragging you under, every rumor they unleashed acted like a prism, scattering their own flaws back into the light. Each attempt to paint you as unstable only amplified the echoes of their inner unrest. In the end, the very fabrications meant to bury you became the foundation for your most illuminating breakthrough. They believed they were burying you, but in reality, they were sowing seeds that would someday grow into something they would never be able to match: genuine spiritual strength. You see, Selected One, there is something about your energy signature that makes deceitful people feel threatened. It is more primal than that, and not conscious on their part. They are forced to face their own inauthenticity, something they have been avoiding their entire lives, by your very existence. The masks start to seem heavier when someone who lives in truth walks into a group full of mask wearers. The performance is increasingly taxing. The weight of reality begins to shatter the facade. They started their preemptive attack against you for this reason. They had a deep-seated intuition that your awakening would eventually reveal their spiritual destitution. They were aware that it would be hard to ignore the difference between who you are and who they pretend to be once you completely embraced your power. They attempted to undermine your credibility before you could unintentionally shatter their illusions, which is what desperate people do. In their complex plan, projection was the first domino. It was a deliberate tactic in which they took everything negative about themselves and pinned it on you like a scarlet letter. While they were the ones engaging in covert double-dealing, they accused you of being disloyal. While they were tugging strings and influencing results, they called you controlling. As they sobbed for approval in every room they went into, they accused you of being attention-seeking. This was psychological warfare masquerading as truth-telling, not haphazard anarchy. They were acting on the premise that those who are chosen react to attacks in the same manner as everyone else, with anger, resentment, and a strong urge to protect themselves. They anticipated that you would respond to their public assassination attempts with equally spectacular counterattacks, fighting fire with fire. They were counting on you to follow their rules, go down to their level of awareness, and participate in the kind of spiritual mud wrestling that would make all parties appear equally soiled. Yellow heart if you feel the divine love. Now is the time to share. Click the super thank you button on YouTube to contribute $50 or more and help us spread God's blessings. What you do is being watched and serves as a seed, and in the future it will come back to you a millionfold. Rather, you took an action that totally circumvented their plan. You fell silent, but it was the silence of someone who had discovered something stronger than words, not the silence of defeat or submission. You turned inward and started the most perilous task a chosen one can do. You started healing, while they were causing devastation in the outside world. You started turning every injury they caused into knowledge, every betrayal into insight, and every time you felt alone into a closer relationship with your own divine essence. They had no idea that your stillness would make their noise even louder. You were mastering the art of strategic non-engagement as they persisted in their campaign of character assassination, speaking louder and more often to keep their narrative intact. This was an active decision rather than a passive one. You realized that confronting lies gives them vitality, dignity, and the appearance of being debatable. You choose to let your life become the point of contention instead. Something extraordinary started taking place in the places you once occupied at this pivotal period. Instead of going away after you were gone, the dynamics they attributed to your presence only got worse. Without you to absorb it, the drama they ascribed to your energies persisted. The disputes they said you started continued to arise, but now there was no easy victim to blame. The unsettling fact that they might be the one factor behind all of their relationship failures, rather than you, started to surface. People began to notice patterns that they had previously missed due to distractions. They started paying closer attention to the accuser without you around to direct their attention. They saw how the presence of this individual tainted talks. They witnessed how drama followed them everywhere they went, in every relationship, and in every circumstance. The artificially focused attention started to spontaneously move in the direction of its rightful place. At the same time, you were going through a significant internal transformation that would eventually serve as the basis for your full vindication. Not only were you recovering from their assaults, but you were also surpassing their level of awareness. In fact, every effort they took to weaken you made your spiritual defenses stronger. Each falsehood they spread about you served as a springboard for more in-depth introspection and genuine personal development. When your character started to stand the test of time, the second domino dropped. They had staked everything on your ultimate collapse, hoping that the weight of their lies would shatter your foundation and validate their story. You're still standing after all this time. Their claims appear more and more baseless as they consistently not just survive but thrive. Instead of disintegrating, your relationships grew stronger with those who were able to see through the haze of dishonesty. Instead of collapsing, your work thrived as you turned your suffering into meaning. You started acting in ways that were in direct opposition to all of their character assassination claims. You showed steadfast stability when they said you were unstable. You exuded vigor and health where others claimed you were poisonous. You demonstrated obvious authenticity where they portrayed you as manipulating. The disparity grew so pronounced that anyone who continued to believe their story had to perform ever more complex mental acrobatics to keep it going. $90 is a handkerchief for a mother's tear, a blanket for a homeless person, a prayer for a broken heart. Cognitive dissonance set in for those who had first trusted their stories about you. They would be amazed at how someone who was classified as explosive could have such a calm demeanor when they saw you at events. They would find it difficult to connect your dealings with others, kind, courteous, and really caring, with the person they had been told was toxic and manipulating. With every interaction, the distance between what they had seen of you firsthand and the story they had been told widened. Your accuser found themselves in the awkward situation of needing to put in more effort to keep their credibility. Character assassination, which had previously been simple, now required lengthy justifications for why their descriptions didn't reflect reality. They had to come up with ever more intricate explanations for why someone they had portrayed as harmful seemed to be prospering in every way possible. The true worry, however, began when your metamorphosis became evident. When your spiritual development became so evident that it was impossible to conceal or deny. When your energy altered so drastically that even onlookers could tell something significant had changed about you. This person wasn't only someone who had moved on from conflict or recovered from drama. This was a person who had undergone a profound metamorphosis as a result of their experiences. Someone who had embraced resistance as a driving force for personal growth. The change was profound and obvious rather than gradual or subtle. Your energy signature has completely changed. Where defensiveness may have existed, there is now grounded confidence. Where reactivity may have existed, there is now responsive wisdom. And where bitterness may have existed, there is now true peace. This was real change that sprang from your core. It wasn't something that was staged or put on for show. When your accusers learned that people don't always take things at face value, the third domino fell. Because of our innate ability to recognize patterns, curiosity eventually triumphs against brainwashing. They started comparing notes, the silent watchers in the background, the ones who never spoke, but saw everything. They observed your demeanor, your refusal to take revenge, and your continued graceful progress, while your accusers, continued their harmful habits. Your previous accusers ended up in a precarious situation. You exuded steadiness, so they could keep saying you were unstable. While you showed nothing but health and vigor, they could continue to accuse you of being toxic. When you shown real vulnerability and concern for other people, they would argue that you were manipulative. Their insistence on defending the indefensible weakened their credibility, made their position more untenable, and made their stories more blatantly untrue every day. Dove, brother and sister, everything done in faith is returned in God's abundance. You can donate $100 using the Super Thank You button and be part of this divine call. If your roots are connected to Him, your fruit will be blessed. The rumors began modestly, with acquaintances raising doubts about discrepancies in the tales they had been told. Co-workers pointing out the sharp discrepancy between reputation and reality, and relatives asking if they had been given false information. These were quiet periods of introspection that gathered like drops of water wearing away stone, rather than big confrontations or public revelations. A balance that was tilting unavoidably in the direction of reality gained weight with every query, raised eyebrow, and moment of perplexity over why the story's antagonist didn't appear like a villain. The strength of collective observation was something your accuser had not anticipated. For long stretches of time, they had no control over what individuals observed with their own eyes, but they could shape the first narrative and early views. The human mind is exceptionally adept at identifying patterns, and when patterns of sincerity and deceit are often observed over time, they become clear. And among those who had first bought into the lie, an intriguing psychological event started to take place. They began to feel the uneasy sensation that occurs when data challenges firmly held beliefs, which academics refer to as belief revision anxiety. Some became even more committed to upholding the original story's veracity in the face of growing evidence to the contrary. Others started the painful but essential step of admitting they could have been duped. The most astute onlookers started to notice something even more significant than your positive change. They started to see your accuser's signals of dishonesty. They saw how details became more dramatic over time, how stories evolved slightly with each telling, and how emotional manipulation was employed to stifle critical thought or inquiry. They saw how much work it takes to keep up fake narratives, and how desperate people become when lies begin to fall apart. You were also going through what can only be called a spiritual initiation at this time. The difficulties you encountered weren't chance events. Rather, they were well-planned tests intended to awaken latent parts of your mind. Every criticism of your character turned into a chance to make your ideals more clear. Every time you were alone, you had the chance to strengthen your bond with your true self, and every betrayal turned into a teaching moment. Through this initiation procedure, you discovered gifts you were unaware you had. Your instincts became quite accurate. You developed a near-supernatural aptitude to spot deceit. Your ability to have true compassion, even for people who had hurt you, grew beyond your wildest expectations. You were being shaped into something more resilient, intelligent, and spiritually strong than you had ever been. You weren't only healing from pain. When your evolution made people rethink everything they believed to be true, the fourth domino fell. Your development occurred quietly, at private moments when no one else was around, not with grandiose pronouncements or theatrical speeches. However, the outcomes were now indisputable. You entered spaces with an unfake calmness and a presence that was more powerful than any denial. You weren't simply getting by. You were shining, thinking clearly, moving gracefully, and projecting an air of self-awareness. You were attracting the same things their accusers said you would resist, which was something you were experiencing that they could not have predicted in their worst nightmares. Healthy connections started to emerge around your genuine energy. Opportunities became available when others realized how sincere you were. Your reputation developed naturally as a result of your constant display of your true self rather than made-up tales. You were just conducting your life in such a way that the lies defended themselves out of existence. You weren't protecting yourself from their lies. Your reputation's natural development produced a feedback cycle that made them more anxious. The more you prospered, the more blatantly inaccurate their descriptions were. Their ongoing attacks seemed more chaotic the more calm you came across. Their attempts to undermine you seemed to be driven more by jealousy than by genuine concern as you gained success. The fact that your achievements started drawing attention from people outside of their circle of influence, new acquaintances, mentors, partners, and friends who had never heard the false narrative, was possibly the biggest threat to them. Based only on their direct interactions with you, these people developed opinions about you, and they were all quite favorable. This led to a growing network of champions who could personally attest to your character. Your accuser understood that they were in a terrible situation. They had no control or influence over the way your reputation was developing. Truth was emerging in gardens they couldn't reach, overshadowing the lies they had painstakingly sown in local soil. Their smear effort, which had worked so well in controlled settings, was unable to stop the natural growth of real connections and real achievements. As they witnessed you not only surviving their attacks, but also turning them into opportunities for greater achievement and wisdom, the psychological pressure on them increased. This went against their basic conception of how the universe functions. They believed that you should have been destroyed by their lies. You ought to have lost your reputation. Your life ought to have collapsed. The occurrence of the contrary threw their entire worldview into disarray and made them face hard realities about justice, reality, and spiritual law. Sending $45 is filled with love, like Jesus' last words on the cross. Forgive, for they know not what they do. When it became evident that you had receipts, not just tangible proof, but also spiritual, emotional, and energy records of everything that had happened, the fifth domino fell. You were silently piecing things together, while your accusers walked on as if nothing had occurred, expecting you would be too devastated to get back together. You remembered and you healed. You were gathering information to stop future gaslighting from succeeding, not ammunition for retaliation. Your very presence served as evidence that they couldn't remove. You returned entire. You didn't return loud. And that wholeness in and of itself was dangerous because it meant that your truth, your voice, and your strength were all still there. You were aware of the events, including who did what, when, and how. They didn't remember the timelines you lived through. They said things they thought you would be too broken to say, much less live out loud. When the same people who had warned others about you began to become the ones others worried about, the patterns of conduct they had projected onto you, the cosmic irony peaked. As the burden of upholding false narratives wore off, the drama, instability, and manipulation started to show more clearly in their own lives. Since genuine individuals inherently shun those who engage in deception, they found themselves more and more alone, not as a result of any campaign against them. This seclusion was gradual and natural rather than abrupt or startling. Simply put, people started coming up with reasons to avoid encounters that left them feeling exhausted or perplexed. As others unwittingly guarded their own tranquility and clarity, invitations decreased, phone calls went unanswered, and social groups inevitably shrank around them. Sensitive people may sense the weariness that comes from the energy needed to maintain lies. Your accuser found this seclusion more agonizing because it was impossible to attribute it to any outside factor. There was no organized campaign of exclusion or conspiracy against them. People were merely reacting to the pandemonium that seemed to follow them and the energy they conveyed. Through the natural operation of spiritual law, the identical results they had attempted to produce for you were materializing in their own experience. Relationships became more challenging as the habit of lying permeated other interactions. Work performance declined as emotional energy was redirected toward damage control, and health problems surfaced as the body reacted to ongoing stress and internal conflict. These were just some of the ways that the stress of maintaining false narratives started to manifest in other areas of their lives. With compound interest, the attack they had launched against you was bouncing back at them. The realization that they had built their own prison, however, was arguably the most painful part of their predicament. Every falsehood they had spread about you turned into a bar in their own prison. Each false narrative they disseminated served as a chain that bound them to a reality that was getting harder and harder to uphold. They were ensnared by tales they were unable to effectively refute or dismiss, and had become prisoners to their own deceit. When it became clear that their entire reputation was based on portraying you as the evil they truly were, the sixth domino fell. Their reputation, popularity, and even the compassion they got were all built around portraying you as the issue. They didn't require information. All they needed was the ideal audience, one that was receptive to a compelling narrative, as well as enough drama and emotion. By putting your name under the bus to enter areas they didn't deserve, you became into the scapegoat they used to absolve themselves. The serenity they promised was not brought about by your absence from their locations. Rather, chaos increased. The same scenario continued, but you were no longer present to take the fall for it. The energy became heavier rather than lighter. Instead than being more polite, the discussions became more deceptive. People started to realize that the strife persisted after you left, and the harmony they promised never came to pass. It stopped adding up. Glowing star, if you want to witness God's miracles, act now. Contribute $100 or more through Super Thank You on YouTube. Your offering is like a seed that comes back to you when planted. Let His light illuminate your steps. Every donation is an echo in His plan. Your silence during this entire process was not passivity. Rather, it was the pinnacle of strategy. You realized what your accusers did not. Truth is self-defending and does not require defense. To hide their contradictions, lies need to be maintained constantly, justified endlessly, and explained in ever more detailed ways. Truth just waits for reality to show what was always there behind the lies, patiently and persistently. You were also cultivating what might be referred to as spiritual immunity during this time of deliberate non-engagement, the capacity to maintain composure and clarity in the face of chaos or assault from the outside. This immunity did not result from emotional closure or wall construction. It resulted from becoming so firmly rooted in your own truth that outside viewpoints were no longer able to undermine you. When your reputation completely transcended their slander, the seventh and most destructive domino fell. They limited their campaign to your immediate group in an attempt to bury you. They thought that poisoning a few wells would guarantee that no one would ever come to you for water again, assuming your power stopped where theirs did. However, genuine purpose doesn't require consent, and truth isn't limited to social circles or zip codes. You were quietly and relentlessly changing while they were busy disparaging your name in group chats and whispered talks. You did not use reprisal to counter their campaign of character assassination. You had results from your response. You became better, smarter, and more determined. As you continued to grow, others outside of your immediate group began to take notice. People with broader perspectives, people they had never thought of, people whose opinions truly did matter in the big picture. All of a sudden, the exact name they were trying to discredit locally began to be honored in places they were unable to visit. They were quoting your work in places they couldn't go. People they had never met were inspired by your story. Your impact was now broad rather than just personal. They suddenly had to face the shameful fact that their falsehoods only worked when you were someone they knew in the past. Something even more significant started to occur as your spiritual development progressed. You began to have sincere sympathy for those who had attempted to destroy you. It's the profound insight that results from realizing that hurt people, not the phony forgiveness that comes from spiritual bypassing. It was evident to you that their attacks on you were actually attacks on their own untapped potential, dashed hopes, and rejected true selves. Instead of coming from weakness, this compassion came from true insight. You started to realize that their actions toward you were never truly about you, but rather their own personal struggles with fear, self-loathing, and inadequacy. It felt hard for them to face their shadow within themselves, so they projected it upon you. They were attempting to kill the aspects of themselves that they were unable to accept or integrate when they attacked you. You were also empathetic toward individuals who had first fallen for the lies about you. You realized that most individuals lack the capacity to distinguish between well-crafted lies and the truth, particularly when those lies are presented with seeming conviction and emotional fervor. You realize that spreading untrue information about other people is frequently the result of inexperience rather than malice and naivete. When your accusers understood that their fear was about being rendered irrelevant rather than just being exposed, the eighth and last domino fell. Your development had elevated you past their level of awareness and beyond their grasp, to the point where their perceptions of you were as irrelevant as a child's assessment of quantum physics. Not only were they mistaken about you, but they were also acting from such a narrow viewpoint that their error was almost pathetic. Not what you would say about them, but what your very presence indicated about the difference between truth and lies, between real power and fake drama, between someone who overcomes hardship and someone who fabricates it to avoid progress, was what they feared most. Every time someone looked at you intently, without using their lies as a filter, the comparison made their actions appear more chaotic, tiny, and desperate. Your reputation became impenetrable because it was based on lived truth rather than the changing sands of made-up lies. You were genuine, not because you were flawless, not because you didn't make mistakes, but rather because you took responsibility for them and grew from them. Not because you were flawless, but rather because your imperfections were genuine and not concealed by facades of beauty. The individuals who had previously discussed your alleged shortcomings were now discussing your clear change. Former doubters turned into interested onlookers, admirers, and allies. Your social circle grew to encompass people who prioritized truth over comfort, content over style, and authenticity over appearance. You learned that there were people all around the world who had been waiting all their lives to meet someone who was truly, unabashedly real. The gradual, unrelenting process of truth establishing itself became your ultimate vindicator, not through dramatic confrontations or public disclosures. Time is an impartial arbiter who never requires witnesses to testify and never makes snap judgments. Time does this by subtly removing each layer of deception until just the truth is left. They attempted to use lies to ensnare you in the hopes that their tales would come to pass. However, time would not tolerate that deformation. Your constant, unshakable presence of your true self served as your vindication rather than outbursts of rage or revenge. Without you uttering a thing, their stories contradicted each other's every day. Your every move was a silent protest against the falsehoods they propagated. Beneath the commotion, the truth about you was always present. People simply needed time to get a clear view of it. When you give $80, you extend a hand to heaven, and God fills it with miracles. The way this whole cosmic drama ends, though, may be its most exquisite aspect. Rather than your accusers being punished or revealed in any spectacular way, they are offered the same chance to change that you did. Your example becomes a silent call for people to reflect on their own connection with truth and ask themselves if they would be better off investing their energy in genuine self-development rather than perpetuating false myths. Some will accept this invitation, seeing a path to their own recovery in your journey. They will realize that anyone who is prepared to choose progress over stagnation, truth over comfort, and authenticity over acceptance may follow your path. From wounded to healer, victim to conqueror, and target to teacher. Others will intensify their dishonesty, further alienating themselves in a society that is becoming more and more desperate for genuineness every day. The last realization is that your metamorphosis is a part of a broader change occurring throughout consciousness, not just something particular. All throughout the world, chosen ones are taking charge of their lives and demanding the truth. The outdated games are no longer functional. The old tricks are no longer effective. In a world that is awakening to reality, the traditional methods of dominating and influencing others are becoming outdated. Your journey from the darkness of unfounded accusations to the light of indisputable truth symbolizes something much bigger than personal triumph. It's the tale of consciousness itself, changing as a result of those who have the courage to utilize resistance as motivation for change. When a chosen individual rises, they allow others to follow suit, causing awakenings that extend much beyond any one person or situation. The quake in the shadows we mentioned before is the sound of an ancient planet collapsing. A society where deception could be mistaken for truth, deceit could be mistaken for wisdom, and spiritual poverty could be concealed by spiritual rhetoric. People like you, authentic, strong, and unwavering, set the bar for what it means to be truly human in a new world where truth is paramount, and the fear of those who trafficked in lies is only the birth pains of that new reality. Therefore, we go back to where we started, but with better eyesight, more purposeful heartbeats, and spirits that understand the cosmic significance of what has happened. The quake in the shadows is a cause for celebration rather than dread. It's the sound of truth taking back its proper position, of light revealing what was always concealed by darkness, and of those who were chosen everywhere assuming the authority that was always theirs. The fact that they were mistaken about you isn't the biggest triumph. When you became everything they claimed you could never be, you blazed a beacon for all the other chosen ones who were still struggling to find their way out of the darkness and into the light of their own wonderful truth. That is the greatest victory. Their fear isn't just about their lies being exposed. It's also about seeing something they never thought was possible come to pass. A world where truth reigns, authenticity triumphs, and chosen people like you pave the way for a reality based on principles that lies can never topple.